I'm not quite sure how Sabbath, this resting place, will come to you. There is this guy, his name is Dr. Anousheh, he's Persian. Recently he's become relatively popular because of the way he talks and his analogies about life. And he says one of the ways that he has attained happiness in life is there are two things in life. There are things I have control over, and there are things I have no control over. Of the things I don't have control over, all I can do is accept. Of the things I have control over, I can just give it a good try. Make sure I've given it all. And just in case I fail, well, I just have to come and accept that. I think you need to have a lot of inner power, inner strength, a good amount of maturity to come to a place where you say to yourself, whatever happens, I will simply accept. Consider the book of Job. He comes to accept everything about his life. The last couple of pages of the book. It's devastating, where you think yourself to be a good human being. You're in love with God, you're in love with religion. You think yourself to be a great human being, and then slowly things are taken away from you. Now in the background, you assume because you haven't been tested. And that's one of the things about, I think, love, depending on what sort of love you're talking about. If you consider love to be gold, for example, it wants to make sure that the container that's going to be holding it is one that's worthy of it. And so love always tests and always challenges the human being. And most often we just fail because it's just way too much. It's far too burdensome. There are too many unknowns. And I think the love affair between Romeo and Juliet is the wrong model for us. It's not the sort of model you want to kind of have in your life and pursue. First, because Romeo is about 14 or 15, Juliet is about 12. It's not like today they go out on dates for 2 months and they say, I love you. Romeo looks at Juliet for like 10 seconds. He's inspired. Juliet looks at Romeo for like 5 seconds. She's inspired. They kind of just say, I love you. He says, I love you as well. And that's basically it. And they haven't really been tested in the sense that, well, Romeo didn't have to go out and get a job. He didn't have to vacuum and wash dishes and take out garbage. He didn't have children to be in a bad mood all the time. He was not tested. So in some ways, he is very lucky because his life remained a fantasy for most of us, the most ideal, because he was untested. It's kind of like the new image of Jesus. For the longest time, because we're scientifically relatively primitive, we kind of accepted the fact that, well, here is, Jesus. He's got long, blonde hair, beautiful blue eyes, chiseled, face. And so these anthropologists and sociologists come together and they say, okay, well, let's figure out what 2,000 years ago, someone in the Middle East, in the desert, what does, desert and the heat and the sun, what do they do to the skin, to the face of a human being? It's impossible. It's impossible for a human being to be scorched by the sun 24/7 and have no wrinkles. So this new image of Jesus is that he's really just profoundly unattractive. And then imagine like you're a pastor of a church and you say, well, okay, I'm going to go with the science of the day. I'm going to remove that particular image of Jesus we've had in this church sitting or standing for the past like 50 years and replace it with this one. Well, you're going to lose almost everyone who comes to your church. And that is, are you there for the image or are you there for the ideas behind the image? And I think the movie V for Vendetta is where Mr. Creedy, he says to V, why don't you die? Why don't you just die? And he says, Mr. Creedy, behind this mask is flesh, and behind this flesh is ideas, and ideas are bulletproof. In some ways, when you fall in love, you realize that your loves, all the things that you have loved in your life, they are not bulletproof. Once they get tested, they slowly die and wither away. It's a curious thing, how someone like Bhai Sahib, or someone like Irina Tweedy falls in love with Bhai Sahib in a way that Nothing can touch this particular emotion. It remains intact and innocent and pure and vibrant. And she's willing to sacrifice for 700 pages. And most of the book is just filled with doubts. She's just angry, and she has every right to be angry. This sect in the Sufi tradition called the Malamatis. Malamat means calamity, means simply to suffer. And I think it may be the tradition from which Gurdjieff comes, because most of his ideas about life, human beings, is that human beings are pathetic, they're forgetful, and they need to be reminded all the time. And the only way they can be reminded is through pain. Nothing else will save them. And I don't think anyone can be trained. I think you either have it or you don't. I watched, I think it was the last game of Kobe Bryant against Jazz. And it was the last 6 or 7 minutes of the game. And Lakers were behind by maybe 10, 12, 15 points. In those 6 minutes, Kobe Bryant scored 50 baskets. It was truly an amazing thing to see. And he wasn't noticing the way people were reacting to him. He was just completely in the zone. And it was my first time watching him. And in some ways it was like kind of reading the gospel, because the intensity of the things that Jesus was saying in the gospel, it kind of resembled very much like the way Kobe Bryant was. You're only focused on your goal, which is to win, which is to play basketball. Not even to win, but just to play basketball. For someone like Irina, so at the beginning of the book she says, I am here to serve this man. To be completely devoted to that idea means fear, doubt, disbelief, uncertainties will never enter. But Kobe Bryant is a physical human being. He could, and they were saying near the end of the game, I don't know if he's able to score the free throws because his legs may be tired, his arms may be tired. As long as you have a physical body, you are going to suffer some exhaustion. And so what you see in the book is that despite her intense love for this man, she gets exhausted. It's just too much. She wants answers, but she doesn't have the patience to sit in darkness so that answers could come to her gradually, slowly. So she begins to blame him. And I think these are just, every craft has its own tricks. Every craft has its own skills that you have to learn. And I think this particular craft, which is the quest to know oneself, there are some things that we know we can see, touch and taste and smell. There are many things that we can't. And I think Kierkegaard was right in the sense that you must at all times take a leap of faith. You can't see, you can't taste, you can't touch, you can't smell. But something inside you must have enough faith, enough love, enough devotion that says, I'm just going to go and do it. And if I fall, I fall. The saying in the gospel, unless you become a child, you can't enter the kingdom of God. Children have no idea where the parents are taking them. But because of their relationship, they simply hold a hand and they walk with their dad or their mom. And the only thing that the mom or the parent will say is, there is something beautiful waiting for you. And that promise becomes, the guiding light.